Italyan. Oops. O Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness upon us. O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows. The milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna. Arjuna is the calf, and people of purified intellect are the drinkers. The milk is the supreme nectar of the Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shivadas right here. Are we leaving this as a memorial?
Oh, yeah. I can put it around there.
Gopal.
I'll be Gopala for today.
I mean, he's with us
Yes.
here, so
You should always
he's
have
actually online with us too. So
There we go.
he won't mind.
Yeah, no, he won't.
So we continue on devotion, yoga devotion, and this we'll take some commentary here from Swami Chinmayananda, some explanation of this last shloka. So the question, and then worship me in the body, and here's what's important, which is the thinking only of me, the devoting fully to me and offering to me. And then we had this beautiful, we'll read it just one more time, in terms of relating to the unmanifest and worshiping and offering to the unmanifest. Those who worship the imperishable, the indefinable, the unmanifest, the omnipresent, the immovable, and the eternal, having restrained all the senses, even-minded everywhere, rejoicing ever in the welfare of all beings, verily they also come unto me. So, again, just coming back to this place, what we're getting is that either path, in any of these paths, for one who's fully and completely devoted to me, being the highest, right? Mm-hmm. In form, in what form? In any form. Or in the formless, we're given the recipe for both. Mm-hmm. And in both cases, we're told, and you shall surely come to me, the highest. You shall surely find that union with the highest. So, not to be forgotten, these. And it's a confirmation, whatever is our path, whatever is the path that sincerely, not for self-centered reasons, not for show, not to be seen a certain way, not to be called pretty or something like this, or not to be called intelligent, but sincerely, where we sincerely commit to service, where we sincerely commit to living the highest, where we sincerely commit to love all and serve all, then we're being told, then it's fine, you shall come to me, and follow your path, and you shall come to me. And there was this but that we were just starting to explore. And this morning, Swami Chinmayananda does a beautiful job of explaining the but. So, but. He says, greater is their trouble, whose minds are set on the unmanifest for the goal. For the unmanifest is very hard for the embodied to reach. Mm-hmm. And key is this discussion of what does embodied mean. And so we'll let him speak on this, and then we can discuss a little bit. So Swamiji introduces this way. He says, after explaining how the goal is reached by all meditators, is one and the same supreme perfection. By explaining how the goal reached by all meditators is one and the same supreme perfection, right? Meditating in form, the formless. Goal is the same. And that it's reached. Okay. So, Jai. Jai God. After explaining that, then Lord Krishna tries to compare the two incomparable paths, he says, both of equal efficacy and merit. He says, greater is the toil of those whose thoughts are fixed on the unmanifest. In this declaration, when read as such and in itself, is not only an advocacy of the path of devotion to a personal God, but also amounts to a positive condemnation of meditation upon the formless. And then he says, such an erroneous and misleading interpretation will render the Gita a scripture that contradicts the eternal wisdom of the Upanishads. Because we know the Upanishads are pointing us towards the unmanifest as well, yes? Okay. So he says that's a misunderstanding to say that Krishna is saying only the personal God path is valid. He's saying both are valid, but there's a reason why he's saying what he's saying about, but it's very difficult for the one who's embodied. So we continue. And then Swamiji says, there's a lot of controversy on this, right? There's the controversy, of course, that we have talked about between those who call themselves Christian and those who call themselves Muslim. In truth, the real Christian and the real Muslim will see each other in the way that's prescribed in their faith, and therefore will love each other wholly and completely. So I'm differentiating between the one who calls themselves this or calls themselves that, differentiating between that and the one who's really in the faith. And so Swamiji adds his commentary. He says, and yet they're vocal champions of devotion who quote this half stanza to beguile the faithful. So sometimes even within these traditions, we'll get some who will call themselves bhaktis, who will say, no, you can't be successful that way. Krishna says it right here. So now he comes to clarify. He says, the first line is commented upon and elucidated by the following line in the stanza. Lord Krishna explains why it is hard ordinarily for seekers to contemplate upon the formless. And he quotes again, the unmanifest is very hard indeed for the embodied to reach. He says the crucial word in the stanza is embodied. It is often very difficult, please forgive me. It is often very directly understood to mean all those who have a physical structure. But if you think about that for a moment, just answer me truly, we've been involved in this together for a while. Do you actually have a physical structure? Answer it truly. No. Either God has, or there is no physical structure.
Right.
Either one could be correct in saying, directionally correct, huh? So you see, do you really have a physical structure? And that's the key that he's pointing to. Are you identified with the body or not?
Try not to.
For the one who's identified with the body, very hard. This is what Lord Krishna says. For the one who's not identified with the body, then it's not as hard. So if you yourself find that you've been able to stop identifying with the body, and that's Raja Yoga, isn't it? So the successful Raja Yogan finds the ability to not identify with the body. The successful Jnana Yogan finds the ability not to identify with the body, because from here, there's no body. There's nobody. There's only Krishna. So, and he says this is coming from Shankaracharya. This interpretation even is coming from Shankaracharya. We take as the gold standard in terms of scriptural interpretation. So he says the crucial word in the stanza is embodied. It's often very directly understood to mean all those who have a physical body. And then he goes on and he says, but the absurdity of such an understanding would become evident if we follow the natural corollary of such an interpretation. If all those who are having a physical body can meditate upon the form of the Lord, then it follows that pure meditation upon the formless is to be undertaken only after the body is dropped and the seeker is dead. So he's saying that's the absurdity of it.
Yeah.
Sri Shankaracharya therefore clearly explains that the embodied means those who are attached to their bodies. If one lives only a life of sensuality and satisfaction of one's body cravings, one will find it too difficult to take to steady and continuous meditation upon the subtle theme of the infinite, formless, and all-pervading. Why? Because the mind, the intellect, will not be sharp.
Caught up in the world.
Caught up.
Yeah.
Caught up in the sense object. So the one who's caught up is what's being shared. Isn't
Clarity.
able to relate to the formless. So for the one who's caught up, then the path has to be personal God. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with the other either.
So Swamiji,
Oh,
can we say that relating to the form is a preparation to relate to the manifest?
we can say like that. Interestingly, the bhakti who loses himself or herself completely, and therefore comes into union. So what comes to mind, for example, is Sri Chaitanya, who simply became Krishna, right? And is there an inner meditation on the formless intentionally? There's simply an inner union with the formless. So we can say it, but we don't have to say that it would always be like that.
Oh, I see.
Right? So having a personal relationship, and we see it. Part of our reference point is to read and watch and participate in the stories of the saints and see how all of these paths play out and how they result in the same perfection. We have so many different masters here, and there are countless saints and sages of all that have come through all of these different paths and all of these different traditions. So there will be the story of one who related from a personal perspective and then moved into a relationship with the impersonal. So who would be a good example for that? Sri Ramakrishna would be a very good example of that. So he became, as it were, a jnani, but his path wasn't jnana. His path was bhakta, right? So just a personal relationship with Kali through an idol. Yes? And relating to that moment after moment after moment. Yes? So what's being described, and fully devoted. Yes? So absolutely in accordance with Sri Krishna's explanation here in terms of how to relate to me in form. And then in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, anyone who picks it up and reads will see that that's a jnani speaking of the formless. Okay? Does that make sense?
So he did attain the final goal just by worshipping the form until
He attained the final goal just by worshipping the form, but he came into the formless place and he espouses the relationship with the formless.
I see.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Sri Chaitanya would continue to espouse the relationship with the form, even though clearly on the inside he is the formless. Huh?
Right.
Oh. Swami Chinmayananda, don't take that, take Swami Shivananda. Swami Shivananda had relationship with the form. It took him to a relationship with the formless, and by following the relationship with the formless, he became a bhakti. A bhakta, a supreme devotee. So it's hard to say that it's going to go a particular direction. That's all that we're putting light on. But certainly the one who devotes to the absolute in form, and this is what is being shared, the one who devotes to the absolute in form, fully and completely will come into the light. And they might not think of themselves as the light, but they just might not think. And don't assume that they do. Where is the person thinking in Sri Chaitanya, for example? There's no person there other than the Supreme Person. Why do you have to have an experience as a separate individual when you're not? And if you're not identified as a separate individual, why do you have to imagine that you once were? This is what happens when we superimpose our own mental states, our own stuff that we're dealing with upon others, and we try to assume that their mental state is the same as ours. Right?
Totally incorrect.
So from here, I can say there's no identification with any individual. There's no identification, I'm separate, you're separate, any of that. It doesn't exist. How it came to be, we could say, is a path. But is this path the same as any of those paths? No, it's not. Oh. So here, Lord Krishna actually, this is where we say this is so beautiful, because he's speaking to every single one of us. And he's not talking about someone else. He's talking directly to each of us. And so he gives us a confirmation on our own path, but he also gives us provisions, watchwords. And he says in order to perfect the devotion, then these factors have to be perfected. If you're going to relate to the infinite, then you have to relate to the infinite. And by the way, if you're trying to relate to the infinite, but you're still living a worldly life, it's going to be very hard for you.
Yes.
Then you should follow the path of bhakti. And that's not a slam to say that. Right? Oh.
What of the person, though limited in devotion, has had devotion their whole life on the formless? Should they convert to pick a form to go further?
Again, what is he saying in this? Let's just explore what he's saying in this particular shloka a little bit more.
All right.
There's just a little bit more commentary, and then we can discuss again. But that judgment's not being given. But what is being said is again, if we find ourselves relating to ourselves as this form, and if we find that we're still motivated by the relationship with sense objects, and we're going after sense experiences, then relating to the infinite, he's saying, will be very difficult.
I agree.
Okay. So here, Swamiji attributes to Shankaracharya. He says, Sri Shankaracharya therefore clearly explains that embodied means those who are attached to their bodies. If one lives only a life of sensuality, etc. He says, one will find it too difficult to take to steady and continuous meditation upon the subtle theme of the infinite, formless, and all-pervading. An old man whose vision is lost and whose hands are shaky may find it very difficult to thread a needle. So too, a mind and intellect agitated, panting, and restless, suffering from desired plays, are not vehicles that can successfully fly beyond the frontiers of names and forms to the endless spiritual glory. In short, to the majority of us, meditation upon the Lord as expressed in the universe, in form, is easier and more profitable. Man can worship the myriad forms through service undertaken in a service of worship and divine dedication. By doing so, the body attachments and sense appetites get purged from his inner makeup, and his mind becomes subtle enough to conceive and contemplate upon the formless and the imperishable unmanifest, which is exactly what you had asked. Then the mind becomes pure enough, and so that may be the path from there.
Right.
We were just saying, but there's also the example of, however, that bhakti, devotion upon the Supreme in form may also simply lead to the goal.
Mm.
Oh. Okay. So, is that helpful?
That extra bit, yes.
So that's the explanation of that but statement of that provision. Okay, we continue. And then in these stanzas, Lord gives something to everyone. And then he says, but those who worship me, renouncing all actions in me, regarding me as the supreme goal, meditating upon me with single-minded devotion. For them whose minds are set on me, verily I become ere long, O Partha, the Savior, to save them out of the ocean of finite experiences, the samsara. And we'll pick up the commentary here. He says, here Krishna prescribes certain definite conditions to be faithfully followed by all meditators upon the form of the Lord. So now he's back to speaking about if you relate to me in form. And he said, any form.
Yeah.
I mean, really any form. And again, the story is the saints. In India, there are those who had absolutely nothing but a cow. And they make an idol from cow dung every day. And in their mind's eye, as soon as they make that idol, they see Ganesha. And what they're seeing through to in the mind's eye is to the absolute. And they live their life as if within that idol that they have crafted with their own hands from their only worldly possession and have in their own mind made divine. And set on an altar, and then committed all of their life breath that day to that which is in that form. To them it is not cow dung, right? To them it is the Lord of the universe in a form. And that's the way with their mind they've related to the absolute, and they've lived for the absolute in that relationship. And everything that they've done for the absolute, and they found themselves free. There is the story of Ramakrishna, who was a priest suffering terribly, and his divine was Mother Kali, Divine Mother, the Absolute, the ruler of the universe, in an idol that he polished and worshipped every day. And he continued to relate. He continued to relate until finally he became free. And there are those who've studied and studied and studied and broken their head and finally gotten it. I am not this body. And I am spirit, the formless, and I am you, and you are me. And there is no difference between us, who have come to know it and have put it in practice and have lived it and have become free. So, you see, the key to this is the mind. How do we relate, and finding the way in form or through relationship with the formless to relate to the highest, not something interim, right? Not a little thing, not my this or my that, or not I as a little being, not I as this body, but those who have been able to go beyond through the use of the mind to relate to that absolute, and then to serve that absolute, to love that absolute, to devote to that absolute, have broken free. And so, again, in the stories, we see so many different paths. I think of how many of us have seen the Flying Saint movie? Thomas of Cupertino. How many of us have seen that? Maybe it's time next tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow evening we could watch it. It's an old movie.
We're switching.
Bhakti.
Are we switching every night?
What is today? Monday? Sorry?
Tomorrow is Tuesday.
Tomorrow's Tuesday, yeah. Did I say Tuesday?
I'm lost.
I don't know, I lose track of time. So we can watch it together. Maybe that's right, maybe not. That's one of Swami's favorite movies. Pure bhakti, but then coming into the light, coming into pure light. So the Lord here is not denigrating anyone. He's not denigrating any of the paths, actually. He's trying to encourage us in whatever is our path to go for it. To honor it, to go all the way. And also to honor all of the paths. So, and now he's back to giving, for one relating to the form, he's back to giving the provisions. Prescribes certain definite conditions to be faithfully followed by all meditators upon the form of God, and concludes that those who are following his instructions fully will be saved from their mortal limitations by the Lord himself, on whose form they are contemplating. A careful study of these conditions will show us how the devotee grows mentally to a stature so divine and high that thereafter he needs no help from anyone at all. But in the beginning, a seeker needs some assurances from his teacher in order to instill in him the required self-confidence to start the practices. And he breaks it down and says, those who worship me, renouncing all actions in me. To renounce our actions to an institution, to an idea, or to a power is to end our individual limitations and identify ourselves with that for which we renounce. Thus, an ordinary person, as an ambassador of his country, becomes a mighty personality in the foreign courts. Similarly, when a devotee of the infinite Lord surrenders himself totally at his feet and acts as a messenger or representative of the will of the Lord, like the song that we sang together this morning, yes? Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. He becomes not only divinely dynamic, but in and through his own activities aware of the presence and grace of the Universal Spirit. And then he speaks of this concept of with unswerving yoga. He says, all attempts with which we develop our mental instrument with any chosen state of perfection constitute yoga. All attempts with which we develop our mental attunement, this is what we're doing, yes, through the path of meditation, through the path of devotion, through the path of jnana, what we're doing is tuning the mind, yes? Okay. He says, all attempts with which we develop our mental attunement with any chosen state of perfection, so with each of us, we will have a goal. Hari's goal may be to perfect the meditation. Your goal may be to perfect the devotion, to perfect the offering of yourself to Spirit, right? To become an instrument of Spirit. So each of us will see, and we want to be able to see, a goal on our path that is a state of union, a state of losing oneself as an individual, or of seeing the totality in all, or serving the totality in all, or becoming that absolute through the practice of meditation. Whatever it is, each of us will see some state of perfection, yes, or perfect knowing.
How about just being an ambassador for the Lord?
To the absolute?
Yes.
And is there a perfect ambassador?
Not on earth, but yes.
Yes, there's a perfect ambassador, isn't there?
Yeah.
So
Lord.
is that your goal?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm confused. I missed something there.
This is the point that he's making. Attunement with any chosen state of perfection, any attempt is called yoga, or constitutes yoga. He says to lift our minds from its present agitations and wasteful tendencies towards a greater goal of ampler joy and fuller wisdom is yoga. This faculty of yoga is in every one of us. At all times we are practicing it. But the results of yoga will depend upon the goal towards which we are heaving forwards. Unfortunately, ours is not generally a divine goal. To strive for the sense enjoyments is called bhoga. So again, he reminds us every one of us is devoted. Every one of us is working towards some ideal. And he says, unfortunately, with many of us, the ideal is not a divine ideal. It's a limited ideal. And he says striving for a limited ideal is bhoga. Once again, the term. Striving for an unlimited goal, an unlimited ideal is yoga.
Yes.
So everybody's in movement here.
Mm-hmm.
It's either bhoga movement or yoga movement.
Prefer yoga.
Everybody's going towards a goal.
And
It's
when you-
either a sense object or a relationship with a sense object, sensual relationship,
That's anybody
Bhoga.
in the world. Yes.
and towards the infinite, it's yoga.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're there for the morning. Any other comments or questions?
It's interesting. I started thinking of two very well-known people when we were growing up, the three of us. One was Malcolm X, and
Yeah.
it was very interesting. It wasn't until he actually went to Mecca on his journey, a pilgrimage, that he began to come more into this fuller wisdom that Swamiji is talking
Yes.
about. And he gave his life. He knew that when he came back, he would be killed because he went again. For those who don't know, he saw his teacher, heard his teacher was messing around with women and had several children, fathered several children. And so through the boga of another, he finally, and combined with the trip he took to Mecca, he began to come into this fuller wisdom. And then another person that came to mind, and we have some of his books here in the library, is Thomas Merton.
Yes.
Raised in as form in the Trappist Catholic tradition,
Yes.
and then when he passed away, he was starting to. He had just taken a trip to Asia, and was exploring more along the formless lines, especially in terms of Taoism. And his writings were reflecting that. Chuang-Tzu and some of the other ones he got into. So it's very interesting how their journeys led them from form to more of a formless approach. And for both of them, it was very interesting how they both left the body. One would wonder where they would be at if they had continued to journey down the path that they had finished upon.
So, and we also have in some of the traditions those who, for example, great Zen masters whose relationship has been with the formless, but then embody and become worshipped.
Yes.
And the worshippers who see the formless in that body also find release. So the complete cycle
Yes.
to play
Both
out.
ways.
Such a play.
Both will bring you there.
If the goal is yoga,
Oh.
and if one steps forward fully. Okay. So close.